This is the project stream, but this is going to be a special stream. For those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time, this is going to be about Gil Elvgren. He is one of my favorite artists. He's an amazing painter, amazing pinup artist. He plays a really important role in illustration development and commercial illustration in the early 20th century. So without further ado, for those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time, I'm going to introduce you to who Gil Elvgren was. This is him right here, born in 1914, and he was creating work all the way up to 1980. I'm going to show you guys some of his absolutely amazing work. But this stream basically is going to be to talk about more of who his influences were, what kind of a role they played in the development of illustration through history, what role they played in influencing each other, and just giving you guys a better idea of all of the different art and what makes them unique, what makes them their own voice. Basically, everybody influenced one another. They were all connected. They all admired each other's work. But as you'll notice, a lot of them are very much their own voice, their own style, and their own interests. So it's just, I think it's just a very unique environment. An environment that I really enjoy. You know, this admiration that people have for each other, unlike capitalist fascist culture, which basically promotes being incredibly self-centered and making sure that you get ahead of others at the expense of others, so on and so forth. So it's not something that I'm going to get into at the moment, but I think that these artistic fields really, at their prime especially, really demonstrated this connection. And this is what I'm really going to be highlighting and talking about, and discussing how that unique environment really played such an important role in development of art illustration. So as you can see, he has a very good understanding of femininity and the female figure, beautiful color work, an amazing painter, you know, aside from the subjects, aside from how beautiful the women are, just his ability to paint is incredible. Really brings life to models that seem slightly fantastical. You know, of course, their features are exaggerated, but he definitely, and here's more examples of that, he knew how to play the middle ground where they are kind of realistic, but at the same time there is that fantasy, sort of fantastic element to them, where he exaggerates their eyes and he exaggerates certain body features to create these very alluring, lush paintings. So these are just examples of his photography. Like he had a studio in his place where he had set up everything from lighting to props to all this other stuff in order to be able to photograph them and create them into beautiful paintings that you see here. And this is a great example of actually what I was just discussing, how he used the photographs and what he did to exaggerate certain features. So as you can see, the hair, right, has more volume in the painting as opposed to the actual model. Her lips and her smile is exaggerated. Of course, the cheekbones are exaggerated as well. So he really understood ways to play with these features. And for those of you who are who were part of the previous stream where I was talking about how you could take parts of your reference and push and pull things. You know, you can exaggerate certain features. You can use the reference as a guide. basically. And then from there, you could just play around with stuff. And this is a perfect example of that. And as you can see, even in the legs, if you pay attention to the shoe, for example, very pointy, the arch is exaggerated. It still strikes more of like a very feminine sort of feature, right? This like very toned and I guess arching part of her foot suggests that as well. So even in simple things like that, he was able to tone things down a little bit and exaggerate certain features to add even more of that alluring quality to the painting. Things like the dress, even, how it's draped on the chair, that's different as well. The arm is in a different position. That's something that could have changed over time, but even in just this photograph, you could see that he was able to play around with stuff like that. The dress itself is a little bit more revealing in the painting, and there's a little bit more fluff to it, as you could see. So there's buoyancy all around the painting, basically, from her hair to her cheekbones, to the lush colors of her lips and the smile having a little bit more warmth to it. I'm going to say it's less poised. Same thing with, as I mentioned, the shoe as well has a little bit more pep to it. So he knew how to play around with the image to make it even more appealing. And that's one of his great qualities, his skills, basically. And we're back to the front. So where we left off last time, this is actually just another quick overview of Howard Pyle, and he was responsible for creating the Brandywine School of Illustration that went on to inspire all these other artists that I talked about in parts 1, 2, and 3. I highly encourage you guys to check that out. For those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time, you could do so by heading over to the video section in the Twitch channel and filtering based on collection, where you will find a highlights folder, that has all of my special streams throughout the Art Lounge Alley, as well as parts 1, 2, and 3, where you guys can catch up and just see all the other artists and their beautiful work, their individualistic styles, and just get more insight into the history of each and every artist, and how it was all connected to what was going on during that time. A lot of things are covered there, but Howard Pyle plays a really important role because he influenced all of them, including Gil Elvgren, including one of my all-time favorite artists as well, Norman Rockwell, who you guys are going to be seeing today. In fact, I'm probably going to be talking about him for the rest of the stream, talking about his beautiful work. But the Brandywine School of Illustration, Brandywine School philosophy, went on to inspire a lot of different artists. Howard Pyle was responsible for it. In fact, his contemporary at the time, who was Vincent van Gogh, was even talking about how he was dumbstruck by his creativity and skill. So again, just to highlight how even painters of prominent painters that we know now, I don't think Vincent van Gogh at the time was very prominent, but as we recognize him now, was even influenced by Howard Pyle. In fact, his work, and what you're looking at right now, went on to inspire a lot of filmmakers as well. For example, Pirates of the Caribbean. The way the pirates were, their costumes were designed, were based off of how Howard Pyle has created the image of pirates. It's one of the things that he's well known for. His big contribution was his design of the pirate image. And this image right here demonstrates that for sure. But you guys can also catch up on Howard Pyle, where I go in depth. I talk about his history. I talk about his who he influenced and all that good stuff in the previous stream that I just mentioned. And where we left off last time was talking about Henry Hintermeister. These are all artists that have inspired Gil Elvgren. So and I want to say that each and every one of them have a little bit of an element in Gil Elvgren's style. So for those of you who are just tuning in, I'm just giving you a brief kind of summary and view of the previous artists that I was discussing. And I'm going to move on to talking about today about another artist who was also a contemporary of Gil Elvgren. Like, these guys knew each other back in the day. They became familiar with one another. They started trading illustration secrets, meetings, having meetings, and or attending meetings rather for illustrators, renowned illustrators, and they were pretty good friends. But again, they're very different in style. And this right here is Norman Rockwell. 1894 to 1978. He was a huge influence on in illustration in general. And I'm going to get into it by first talking about his history. He was a painter and illustrator. And Rockwell is most famous for the cover illustration of Everyday Life. He was famous for the cover illustrations of Everyday Life he created for the Saturday Evening Post magazine over nearly 5 decades. Among the best known of Rockwell's work are the Willie Gillis series, which is what you're looking at right now, actually. And I'm going to give you guys like a brief view of this series. There's like multiple of those. Rosie the Riveteer, The Problems We All Live With, which is a great, great painting. Saying Grace, and the Four Freedoms series. He's also noted for his 64-year relationship with the Boy Scouts of America, during which he produced covers for their publications. Rockwell was a prolific artist, producing more than 4,000 original works in his lifetime. Rockwell's work was dismissed by serious art critics, quote-unquote, in his lifetime. Many of his works appear overly sweet in the opinion of modern critics, especially the Saturday Evening Post covers, which tend towards idealistic or sentimentalized portrayals of American life. This has led to often deprecatory adjective Rockwell-esque. Consequently, Rockwell is not considered a serious painter, quote-unquote, by some contemporary artists who regarded his work as Borgios, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, and quiche. Writer Vladimir Nabokov stated that Rockwell's brilliant technique was put to bland use, and wrote in his novel Pnin, P-N-I-N, that Dali is really Norman Rockwell's twin brother, kidnapped by gypsies in babyhood. Brilliant. He is called an illustrator instead of an artist by some critics. Designation he did not mind, as that was what he called himself. In his later years, I mean, let's talk about that real quick. The amount of jealousy that whole section spewed, it was ridiculous. Like, just looking at this work and how amazing it is all around. And you guys are going to see more and more of it. You could see how people were just, incredibly jealous. They were incredibly jealous of his talent and what he was capable of doing. And rather than actually supporting that, supporting the industry, and this is something that I talk about often, this idea that it's a competition, a competition for stage light. And I think that has really been, I'm going to say, exacerbated by capitalism. This idea that you can make so much money and you become so rich and famous, this whole idea of it, pinned people against each other in a sense, and I think because there was no counterculture that was pushing for an opposite sort of a scenario of like, that's amazing. There's an artist out who is inspiring people to look at more art and to really appreciate illustration. That is a helping hand to anybody who's interested in the art field, as opposed to turning it into this like cutthroat, environment where people are just like trying to talk down to each other, trying to undermine each other, trying to, belittle one another as a way to feel better about themselves, which never really works. It's a really toxic sort of approach, and I'm going to say that it slowly became and increasingly became more and more of a case. Now, some people, of course, you're entitled to your opinion about things, and if you don't really enjoy the art, you're free to speak about it. But I think that there should be more artists actually just supporting one another, supporting the industry that they're really into themselves, rather than viewing each other as like competition or whatever else. Because to me, that idea doesn't really create progress. In fact, it just creates regress, as we've seen through history, as we've seen even modern day, what that sort of idea breeds. It breeds very sociopathic behaviors where people don't like each other because of this like competitiveness of wanting to be the one on stage, as opposed to this person or that person or whatever. It becomes incredibly a self-centered endeavor. Not to say it's not important to care for yourself, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of others, at the expense of somebody else, or having to see somebody fail in order for you to feel better about yourself and your position in life and who you are and how you are and whatever else. It's a really, I want to say it's a very toxic direction. I think that if people were taught more progressive views, that multiple people can exist on the stage light, as we see now, it's not just one or two people. There's plenty of artists out there, and I think it will be more and more healthy for people to see it in that perspective, rather than you have to beat this person in order to get that stage light, or in order to get the fame or whatever. I don't see that as being a positive direction. I don't see anything beneficial really coming from it, except becoming increasingly more and more toxic the more it becomes accepted, and the more it's okayed by society, and the more people join that wagon, basically. I'm not going to get way too carried away with it. There's a lot to talk about Norman Rockwell's paintings, but I just wanted to highlight that, just from these few paragraphs talking about how many critics, quote unquote, people who aren't really painters themselves, they're just criticizing work, or like harping on them for not being what they expect them to be. yeah, it's pretty funny to read about that. So going on, in his later years, however, Rockwell began receiving more attention as a painter when he chose more serious subjects, such as a series on racism for Look magazine. One example of this more serious work is The Problems We All Live With, which deals with the issue of school racial integration. The painting depicts Ruby Bridges flanked by white federal marshals walking to school past a wall defaced by racist graffiti. This 1964 painting was displayed in a White House when Bridges met with President Barack Obama in 2011. So that's a really amazing accomplishment. His painting is in the White House now, and in that moment especially, such an iconic moment, somebody who faced this disgusting, idiotic reality of racism, especially going to school, where somebody's trying to attain education and grow and learn and be part of society, that this little girl is facing this idiotic state of mind. But it's funny to think that 1964 and it's 2020 and we're still having that as a focal point in politics. Like, that should be something that people deal with. It's not going to go away. There's going to be ignorance, there's going to be a bunch of dumb people around who subscribe to it, but that shouldn't be something that's in politics. Like, I think politics should be way past that. They shouldn't even be discussing it. It should be banned as an endeavor, to make things racist in any way, or supporting white supremacy or enabling it in any way. That shouldn't even be in politics at all whatsoever. And that's what we have to strive for, to boot out all these Nazis basically in the White House. But yeah, what is it? 60 years later, we're still talking about this stuff. So it's important that people get involved to try to get this out. We don't need that. We got to move past that. We got to progress. We got to start living together as people and not as these divisive, idiotic, superficial, realities where people are criticizing each other based on color and all that stuff. It's really ridiculous. But it's something that I'm going to show you guys. This painting I'm going to show you as well. It's a beautiful painting done by Norman Rockwell. And what a moment, President Barack Obama meets with that little girl. I'm pretty sure it was a lot of emotion for Ruby Bridges, especially having to face that back in the day, and then having to meet the president of the United States, who was also black. So going on, Elvgren shared his admiration for the Brandywine School's philosophy of painting with Rockwell. This is something I was mentioning before. The two men first became acquainted in 1947 when they both attended a Brown and Bigelow managers convention in St. Paul. And I'm going to show you guys in the book, actually, and it's going to be an image to show that they were together in this meeting. And friendship developed. Elvgren and Rockwell were two of a kind. Both had a knack for portraying real people in totally believable situations. The difference was that Rockwell had the choice of an almost unlimited array of subjects for his paintings, whereas Elvgren seemingly had less freedom in his pinup assignments. Yet Rockwell soon took the opportunity to tell Elvgren what the latter had already often heard from other artists, that he admired his work and envied him for his job of painting the world's most beautiful women. Their meeting marked the beginning of a long association, which even led eventually to their sharing artistic secrets during their annual encounters. Norman Rockwell was also a student of the Art Students League and studied under Brigman. So both of those names are really important. Art Students League is pretty much a great place and has this huge history and reputation for being a place for all these different type of artists. Now, if you guys go back to the previous parts parts 1, 2, and 3. I also mention other artists going back to like late 1800s who attended that school, and this school still exists today. It's in New York City. It's a great place. It's open to everybody. There are no requirements for it. You just have to be able to pay for classes. So you just come in, and it's very affordable, which is the beauty of that school, is that it gives the opportunity for pretty much anybody to come in and start taking these classes with very well-renowned artists, be part of an artistic community there as well. So if you're in New York City, I highly encourage you guys to check that out. You could probably take, there's like a sketch class where you go and you sit down, you draw from a model. There's a tutor there, there's an instructor there who's gonna come, like if you come up to them and you ask them for advice, they'll be there to actually guide you and help you. So it's a great environment. I highly encourage you guys to check that out. Very affordable, and as I mentioned, there is no requisite. You don't have to have like a degree of any sort. It's an opportunity for you guys to learn, to be part of that. So excellent school, and it has this amazing history of having all these legendary artists and painters being part of that. Brigman is another name, is an instructor that was at the Art Students League, who taught at the Art Students League as well. And he has a book out that highlights talks about anatomy in depth, about anatomy, and gives you guys examples for all parts of the body. So if you guys could get your hands on it, it's an excellent book. You could learn a lot from it as well. So yeah, that pretty much sums up Rockwell. There's going to be a little bit more about him in future readings, but I just wanted to show you guys this stuff. So this was the what was the name of it? Willie Gillis series. So it's just, you could see just beautiful work here. And he also, as I mentioned with Rockwell as well, not Rockwell, sorry, with Elvgren, that he was able to have this like fantastic sort of element, or I want to say it's a little bit exaggerated, slightly comic bookish feel to his drawings, but they still had a lot of realism to it. And I think Rockwell is another one who was able to do it. Like, you could see in these paintings, and as I'm going to go through them, how he kind of juggles both so well. Like, the face expressions, they're also slightly exaggerated, but if you look at how he draws hands, how much detail he puts into pretty much everything, from the shoes of Willie Gillis, for example. If you look at the shoes on there, it's beautiful work. It looks better than a photograph, I'm going to say. Same thing with his fingers. If you look at the fingers, and this is all oil painting, so incredible understanding of color mixing. He was able to nail that down, and it breathes so much life into the drawings. Now, of course, this is a time of military stuff. This is like World War II things. It's just crazy to think how many artists actually were part of that. It's pretty upsetting. But I will say this, I think, in my opinion, all that happened because people weren't independent enough from the minds of politics, or politicians from the minds of politicians. They got brainwashed, whether it was in Germany, whether it was in Italy or Russia, and like all those places, people weren't active enough to prevent these politicians from brainwashing the society, from pushing things in that direction. They weren't active enough to boot them out of there. I think each country has, or the citizens of each country have a duty to make sure that their leaders don't create this kind of chaos, that they don't contribute towards this insanity and violence. And very basic and idiotic behavior. And it just went further and further, you know. It was because of the corruption of all these capitalists and elitists that things were pushed further and further, and more people got pissed off at the economical state. You know, I'm going to say that back in that time, the economy was suffering for the same reasons, because greed didn't want to contribute towards the economy. And instead of them trying to create opportunities and creating better policies and better environments and improving the economy, they pushed, exercised their ego trips with each other and enacted a war in each and every place. It was ridiculous. But yeah, I think just citizens really have to be diligent about that and boot out any politician who tries to push things in that direction. Do the best that they can to get them out of there. Anyways, yeah, so it was just that time, as you could see in these paintings. Really, a lot of them were part of that whole like military propaganda. But here is just to show even more how great he understood color, color and composition, and how just in this composition, for example, you have the green and the yellow going well together, and how it just kind of travels throughout both of the figures, starting with the blonde and her yellow ribbon in the hair to the yellow scarf that's tucked into her skirt, to the yellow or the wooden handles. You could see that continuation of that yellow that kind of connects to the next figure, and how she's also wearing blue, yellow gloves, and that kind of comes back all the way around upwards towards the gloves as well. And with the skin tone adding to it, being an in-between sort of color, is just a great composition for it. It really stands out with that blue and green combined. So very great understanding of color and composition in this image as well. And of course, beautiful figure drawings. Like the what I like about it is how much balance that they have as well. You could really see what brings that realism to it isn't just like the rendition of all these features in the painting. It's also just him understanding the balance of the body as well. They're all the way that the woman on the left is arching forward, and the way the woman on the right is kind of bending back. There's this like kind of, I'm gonna say, expressive exaggeration to their pose that still makes sense. It doesn't look like they're gonna topple over, neither of them, despite their kind of like exaggerated body language, that they're still pretty balanced. So another amazing trait. Moving on, this is more of the Willie Gillis series, more paintings, and you could see him actually in those frames that she has hanging on her wall, with all of them kind of staring at her. And this is kind of like the propaganda of the time of like, the soldiers being away from home and having this connection and sending letters as a form of hope to come back and see these women. And this is kind of that. This is kind of saying like, there's always hope to come back to the ones you love, and whatever else. And that propaganda as well. But yeah, still beautiful paintings as well. More elements here, just demonstrating how much detail goes into these paintings. yeah, just looking at the texture of each and every material that's on here. Him being able to capture that. You could tell the difference between the bed sheets and the texture of a comforter. That it's different type of material, as well as the robe that's on the bed as well. Like, again, it's this mixture of kind of exaggerated features for Willie Gillis, for example, in his face. There's a certain comical sort of element to it, but still plays this plays in the middle of like this realism as well. Great composition as well. I think great color composition. Just having it between these grays, basically the grays of the wall and the floor, and the white being kind of in the center of it, with the reds around. So not too many colors, but used well enough to add a different element, I guess, to it. Comparison to the face, having so much color on there, and her having the red hair, to having the robe and the shoes on the bottom as well, having a similar tone to it. And this is another one that he's really well known for, Rosie the Riveteer, 1943. Again, this is like World War II propaganda for it. But beautiful work. Just looking at the metal, right, and how he's able to mix the colors on there. It's absolutely incredible. I want to say that he's also really good. Well, he's good at drawing and painting pretty much anything, it seems. And you guys will see more of that as we go through it. But the dirt that's on her arms, mixed in with all the skin color as well, to demonstrate that, like, machine oil that's still on her, from doing the man's work while the man is out in the war. And her foot is on, if you take a look at it, her foot is on like a Nazi symbol there, which is something, again, to remind that these people who sacrificed themselves, your grandparents, they all sacrificed themselves to fight against fascism. So to think that now people are trying to reestablish that in the States after all of that, after all of the amount of craziness that was witnessed, the amount of trauma that came from it, and all of that, how that rippled through family life as well. People having to deal with the PTSD of all those soldiers who basically were used and abused to go and sacrifice themselves for this like political negligence, and all these like deranged, exploitive, sick people who were in position to enact all that kind of stuff. So yeah, just a little side note there, that is not an American value. So those who are trying to enact that same sort of behavior, those same sort of that same trajectory that enabled and grew in Europe and also here in the States, it's something that I want to say that we're still seeing the repercussions of, because all these values are not coming from the young generation. This isn't kids who are 13, 14 coming up with these theories. They are products of kids that were raised by people who were brought up by those times. And at those times, people had to be aware of what the Nazi values were, which was this whole idea of superior, inferior, this whole idea of, if you are not white, or if you are not Aryan or whatever else, then you don't deserve to live. It's very much similar to capitalist values, that if you are not contributing towards their profits, as we saw in the pandemic, that you don't deserve life, you don't deserve to live. In fact, wiping people out for the sake of more profits for the sake of being able to make even more money, I don't see that being any different than somebody who's throwing people in a gas chamber for their own sick endeavors. You're murdering people for some sick philosophy that doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever, and is on the same lines as a psychopath. So if we're going to put psychopaths in jail, if we're going to trial them, and if we're going to be shocked at, what they do, I don't see these endeavors done by people with lots of money to be any different. Because essentially they're saying the same exact thing, that for some reason they are more deserving of life than others. And I think we just have to drop this whole idea of who deserves more or less when it comes to that topic. Absolutely. It's something that is driving people more and more crazy. It's turning them into sociopaths and narcissists and psychopaths. And I don't mean that by pop culture references. I'm talking about clinically. What qualifies for a person to be any of those things, and what sort of traits come along with those behaviors, those mental conditions. And I don't think that it's only genetic. There are some people who are born with these disorders. I think it's also something that could be passed down like a virus, interacting with somebody who has that sort of behavior. When people talk about toxic work environments and how that affects them psychologically, it's having to do with that. It's having to do with how people interact with one another. And a lot of it has to do with these kind of conditions. And I'm going to say that, of course, the Nazi Party was basically a psycho party. It's a party of psychotic people who spread this mentality, spread that behavior to others who became susceptible to it or were conditioned to it. So there's like multiple avenues to become that. It's not only just hereditary. It could also be something that is conditioned. So, you're all that stuff just continue to grow, and those parents had to be aware of it. Your grandparents had to be aware of it, and that was something that started to develop more and more in the States, because the idea was, what was the propaganda that was being sold at the time? Anything you could do, I could do better. This competitiveness, this idea of like, I'm better than you. That was something that the Nazi Party was advocating, basically fascism was advocating. So fighting fire with fire ended up creating people with the same values, basically, as we see now. And as we've seen through that period on, it continuing to be being pushed in schools, it's continuing to be pushed in work environments, and therefore perpetuating that same thing that they fought against. It's infecting more and more people to think that way or to behave that way, which essentially what pushed all of those insane behaviors of like concentration camps and throwing people in gas chambers and abuse and psychological abuse and physical abuse, torture, and deriving pleasure from all that stuff because they thought that they were these immaculate, amazing people, above everything else. And that's where the core of that is. This idea of, I'm superior to because of. So if we want to stay away from that, we have to end that sort of culture. We have to end that sort of message rippling through. We can't continue on supporting these behaviors, expecting things not to spiral out to exactly that. It's the whole point of history, is for us to learn the pitfalls and grow and progress from that, not to repeat them. But it seems like now we're seeing a lot of these people who were products of that time pushing it to continue, pushing it to grow and more and more and more. Here, even in the States. So you can't say you believe in American values while you continue to perpetuate something that American values fought against. The oppression and abuse of anything that isn't like them, isn't like what a group of people believe in. The opportunities here were meant for everybody. And that's something that we have to perpetuate. The freedoms of other people and their beliefs, their practices of whatever. The idea of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and justice for all, right? Like that's what was echoed. But now it's being veiled by these capitalist fascist endeavors. So something that I really do feel like it's important to talk about, especially on election day. It's a really important period because, as I mentioned before, this is really defining because it's not just about presidency. As you guys saw, it really depends on Congress. That's where laws are made, and that's where they're pushed on to the president for him to sign into law. So if we have people who are blocking every single thing because it's split down the middle, in both chambers, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, if they're constantly blocking everything, it never gets to the table for it to become law. And in fact, they can reintroduce things and continue to change those things because it never really gets pushed onto the table of the president for him to sign into law and just put away. So we need to, more than the presidency thing, we have to make sure that there are people in there who are not going to continue to block progress because they want to make it as difficult as possible since they're not in power. We have to make sure that we have people elected who are going to push for progress, who are going to sign away for things that the voices of the people are demanding, basically. So it's just important to talk about all that stuff. And I think it's something that we're going to still continue to talk about because, they're not going to just go away. It's not like after this election, everything's going to be fine and, fine and dandy. We got somebody who is trying to create as many problems as possible because they're greedy, and they're not just greedy for money, but greedy for attention and power and all that other stuff. So that's just going to be there. We just have to be more diligent about making sure progress is going forward. Anyways, getting back to Rockwell, this is another painting talking about all this stuff, actually, and I think it's kind of interesting, actually, if you look at like there are bands on their arms. It's kind of similar to like what Nazis wore, right? They had those bands on their arms with the Nazi symbols on there as well. So it's kind of symbolic, actually. She's being escorted by these agents, basically. But yeah, you could see that disgusting graffiti in the background with the tomato smears towards this girl, this little kid, basically, this child that is trying to get a good education and to be part of society, part of the people, being a person, not a black kid, just being a person. But yeah, it's a really powerful image, and very well painted, obviously, all around it. And this is one of the paintings that he's very, very well known for, and that's when he started to be seen as an artist and as a painter, as opposed to somebody who just wanted to commit themselves to Rockwell-esque, quote-unquote, images of like endearing family life. And I think in some ways what they were doing by making those comments was, of course, during that time, people were witnessing this bigotry, and they were witnessing how awful behaviors were, and that criticism was probably to say, hey man, like, you're an artist, you're of influence, you have a great style, and you're captivating people, try to make use of it in a way that's really gonna make people think, in a positive direction, in a progressive direction. So I think it was just a little bit of that. Those digs were to push him out of like a comfort zone of trying to portray this imaginary or one-sided sort of perspective of America at the time, of like how everything is very peachy keen, and everybody's happy, and warm, sunny, cozy feelings of family life and all that other stuff. Not that that's not important, and though there are beautiful images, it's just kind of like veiling this ugly side of what's really going on, these really important things. And this is why I believe it was called, the problems that we live with, that being this idiotic racism. So very beautiful painting, incredibly well done. Like even just the background, the walls, like looking at the texture on there and looking at the colors on it, I'm gonna say is there's like so much into it. Like there's so many different colors that were put together to bring out this texture, of like a broken wall. And of course, looking at their hands, right? Like incredible amount of detail on there. Again, it just feels like it's more real than a photograph. That's how much effort he put into it. I could go on about this, but I'm going to move on to the next one. And there's actually a lot more. This is another one of the things that he's famous for, which was saying grace. And I also think it's a beautiful painting as well. It kind of just points out the fortune of American life, and especially at the time when there was so much craziness going on, that people were you're seeing them sitting in this environment, and they're pretty well kempt, right? Like they don't look scrappy, they're not in they don't look like they're in bad position, and it's just people really appreciating that the place that they're in, that they have these opportunities, and that they're able to sit and have like a meal together. Whereas like basically the world was burning around them at the time, and people weren't getting the same opportunities. So I think it's a really it's a great moment to highlight whatever your beliefs are. I think that on its own applies to pretty much everybody. Just being thankful for that, being thankful for having that in their life at that moment, especially, and even going forward. I think a lot of people get spoiled by the abundance of things, and just don't realize how good people have it. So sometimes when people are like, oh, I'm really depressed because my favorite show isn't on, I'm like, I don't think you really know what that word means. Depressed isn't just this fun word to throw around. Similar to the idea of like how people are throwing around the word sociopath and psychopaths and narcissism. Like these are all just like fun words to throw at each other, but really they have importance. So when it comes to actually using them, people take it seriously, and that's the problem with like abusing it. I think similar to that word, that 4-letter word that people are scared of, LOVE, where it's like people throw that word around for everything. Like, I love this. This is so, it's just abusing the word. So when it comes down to it, people just don't really appreciate it, or don't really find value in it, and it becomes this kind of watered down concept. And the same thing when it comes to that, when you actually see psychopaths who are on the podium screaming things that is going to create, at the time, especially creating World War II, people being like, oh, this is a psychopath. Like people are just taking it as pop culture reference, and rather than being like, what, we got a psychopath and he's leading the nation towards chaos. I think that's a problem. But yeah, this just kind of this painting just kind of shows that, and you could see the guy all the way at the top left, who's kind of recognizing that. He's like, yeah, you know, that is something to appreciate. You know, this moment, the how fortunate we are to be able to do that, and how precious that reality is to each and every one of us. Being safe, being well taken care of, having food in front of you, and just kind of having this like abundance. It's a real gift. But just going back to the painting itself, like amazing amount of work. I don't even know where to begin. He's not using incredibly vibrant colors, as you could see, different from Gil Elvgren, right? Like, it really depends on what scene he's painting. Rockwell is using colors for all sorts of stuff. Like, so some images are more subdued. They're not as vibrant. But there's like this holistic sort of unifying element to all the color choices in this painting, like from the drapes in the background, to the shirts and the scarves, to like the newspaper and the silverware and the table. They're all just kind of in that same tone range and color range, from the also like the I guess what is it, like sugar and salt and all that other stuff, like all of that, it just comes all around, and unifies everything, you know, all those colors. To even the bottom right corner, you could see from the lighting, I guess, that there's a hint of that white there as well. But even in the faces, you know, the face colors, they're not incredibly vibrant, right? It's not incredibly light. And it's still kind of in the same range as like the coats that you see, the pants that you see. They're all very close in value. So just to highlight how everything is just unified, you know, everything connects with each other, from the jackets that they're wearing to the colors of the chairs. You know, all of it just kind of connects with one another to create this painting where things do pop out. You could obviously see that the people pop out and their faces pop out, but in terms of color, nothing is really pushing and pulling your attention to a very specific place. It's all just connected very well. And it's pretty much the fact that the people are in center and there's nobody else that is fully developed in a painting, right? It's not like you could see the guy at the top left corner, you could see his other half. It's purposely cut off, you know. And the other guy that's in the bottom left holding the cigar, he's also kind of cut off, to imply that people are recognizing the moment, but they're not the center focus. You know, it's just adding more attention towards the center of the painting. So excellent composition. Rendering is incredible, you know, from the face expressions of all of them, the kids especially, or the young guys sitting at the table, to the haircut of the kid, actually, the back of his head, and how well that's done. To the guy at the top right, his face and all the wrinkles on there and colors that are mixed in to give him a little bit more age and grit. To the background where you see like the factory work in the background with like the steam coming from the train. It's just beautiful. I'm speechless, to be honest. I don't know how else to describe it, other than just absolutely beautiful work. I'm going to do one more, guys, and I'm going to have to end the stream here. But this is the Four Freedoms, basically. Another amazing painting. And it's not just about the painting. You know, it's not just the techniques. It's the fact that he chose these messages, right? So, like, that he did work for these messages. that's what makes them so powerful as well. So combining his incredible skill in being able to draw and paint people, all that stuff, to these messages as well. So yeah, just to go for the first one, I'm going to say that's the most important one: freedom of speech. You know, the ability for somebody who is, let's just say he's part of the jury, it looks like, and he's able to stand up and speak his mind. You know, where there's places, obviously, like we're seeing right now in history, well, not in history, in present day, places like Iran, where people are being killed for just very basic rights to their own bodily autonomy, and you know, being able to just express themselves in very basic ways. You know, how they dress is even controlled, and people are being thrown in jail and are sent to death because they're like creating probably insane stuff. But yeah, here it just highlights the ability for this person to just stand up and say what he feels, and people are free to do that. The second image is something that right now we're actually facing a problem with. You know, this image is supposed to show that people should have freedom to practice any faith that they choose. You know, as long as it doesn't come at the expense of others, you know, as long as you're not trying to oppress others, you should be able to practice that. You know, the whole idea of it is to be very spiritual. It's not to be oppressive, you know. So like, that's what these religions are trying to teach people. That's the amazing thing, that it's baffling that people are using violence to promote something that tells you not to use violence. Like, they're using all the terrible techniques that each and every religion tells you not to do. They're like, don't be an awful person, don't be a psycho. You know, these are things to prevent you from being a psycho. And people are like, I'm gonna act like a psycho to say that I am a believer of this religion that tells me not to do these things. So that's a mark of crazy, when your logic and your reasons don't make any sense. You're a crazy person. When they're contradicting themselves over and over again, that's a mark of being crazy. It's fixable. You know, it's fixable with dedication, hard work, holding yourself responsible for contradictions, and monitoring to make sure that you're as consistent as possible. You know, don't make excuses for yourself. Anyways, not going to get into that. But yeah, it's just this idea again. And we're facing that here, you know, where people are trying to enforce like religion onto others, rather than having that be an option and an opportunity for people to practice what they choose. You know, again, as long as it's not at the expense of others, as long as it's not oppressing and abusing others in order to practice their religion. So yeah, that should be there, right? That should be something that we're still trying to protect, and we're still defending. Again, it's our sense of freedom, our ability to choose. And then the bottom left one is suggesting, you know, for me, when I'm seeing all these paintings, I'm just sharing with you guys my perspective on them. Might not be 100% accurate, you know, but this is just how I'm interpreting them. And to me, it just seems that it's the satisfaction of having a secure, comfortable life, that you could raise your family, you could provide for them, they have safety. You know, you're not living in a shack where somebody kicks open your door and takes your kid for like a kid army, you know, where you have that happening in some countries where people don't have this security, people don't have this ability to just raise kids and not even have to worry about something like that. I don't think people recognize how good it is over here in the States, I'm going to say, as opposed to in other countries, or they do and they just they don't care. But it is something to appreciate and to stand up for, you know, to maintain that, as opposed to have it be a thing only available for the very rich or the very fortunate. You know, like that's the beauty of American values, that it's supposed to be opportunity for everybody, not just the few. That's when it becomes the few, it transitions into an oligarchy, and that's against those are against traditional American values as well. Anyways, moving on to the next painting, something similar to the previous one, the saying grace, which is the ability for you to come together with your family in a safe environment, share a wonderful meal with one another, and be happy. Be happy in this free environment, an environment that doesn't have danger looming around the corner. It doesn't have a bunch of oppressors who are trying to kick open your door and interrogate you and see what you're doing in your own house. What kind of religion you're practicing, who you're practicing it with, who's your significant other, are they male, are they Christian, are they female and male, all that stuff. It's just an environment for people to feel at liberty to and peace in their own house and share a big meal, whereas there are people out there who are having food shortages. So yeah, wonderful paintings, incredible rendition. Again, it's one of these things where I'm just flabbergasted. I don't know how to describe how well it's all done. I just feel like I'm reiterating the same stuff. But I'm going to say in the very first painting, the amount of texture that's on his face and his fingers as well is incredible. Just having to mix that and just capturing the realness of all of it is incredible. Yeah, I'm kind of running out of words, but it is going over the limit, everybody. I am going to come back to part 5, I guess. This is just Norman Rockwell. There's still more paintings to go. But I do really enjoy his work, and there's so much to talk about in each and every painting that I see it kind of running on for a bit. But I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. If you guys have any questions and comments, feel free to leave your opinion about all this stuff. Whatever it is that I'm talking about, I'm always happy to hear from you guys. Always happy to hear what your opinions are, what your perspectives are, whether you agree, disagree. It's all welcome, so just share it with everybody. I'm going to read it out loud as well for others to hear as well. So, yeah, leave those in the comments. Send me a message, whatever it is. Feel free and open up a dialogue. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. And like I mentioned, I'm going to continue on with this next week, probably. Maybe, yeah, because I do want to stream the project stream as well. So Thursday is going to be the project stream again. Tomorrow is going to be coloring comics. Friday is going to be the 100th episode or stream of Figure Drawing Basics, and it's going to be a special stream. It's not going to be more of Gil Elvgren. That's going to be next week. It's going to be something new. It's going to be a flick. It's rated NC-17. It's an animation. Very cool message. It's philosophical, beautiful work, and I'm very excited to share it with you guys. So make sure you tune back in on Friday for a special stream. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be to celebrate the 100th stream of Figure Drawing Basics. So yeah, just make sure you tune in then to see what it's all about. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed all this. If you enjoyed all this content, make sure you remember to hit the like and subscribe button. They're both greatly appreciated. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.